You are listening to episode number 54 of the Everything Ham Radio podcast. Last week we talked about stealth antennas. This week we're going to be talking about building some. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some upcoming events, some contests, as well as some hamfests over the next 2 weeks, and wrap it all up with some news from around the hobby. So stay tuned. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Everything Ham Radio podcast. My name is Curtis, my call sign is Kilo 5 Charlie Lima Mike, and I am your host for this podcast. This podcast is released every Thursday morning. You can listen to us on iTunes, on Stitcher Radio, on Google Play, and several other places as well. You can follow me on Facebook at facebook.com/Everything Ham Radio. I also have a group at facebook.com/groups/Everything Ham Radio. You can follow me on Twitter at K5CLM, on YouTube at youtube.com/Everything Ham Radio, and all that other stuff. Please also subscribe to my email list. You can do that at everythinghamradio.com/subscribe. Okay, so like I said today we're going to be talking about how to build antennas. We're going to talk a little bit about VHF antennas, UHF antennas. We're going to do some HF antennas. I'm basically only going to touch on some of the easier ones, and kind of the ones that are going to be the easiest for especially those that are new to build. Okay, so I'm not going to go into like the delta loops and the quad antennas and multi-band antennas and stuff like that. I'm just going to do kind of the easy ones. I'm just going to stick to those. So we're going to talk about those here in just a little bit. But first off, I want to thank West Mountain Radio for their sponsorship of this podcast. If you haven't already, head on over to their website to get a free gift with any purchase, and you can find out more on that if you go to everythinghamradio.com/WMR. You get a free USB power flow detector meter type thing. Anyways, head on over to that address to find out more information on that. Really neat little gadget. They have a whole bunch of stuff, and we're going to talk about it here a little bit later. But thank you, West Mountain Radio, for your sponsorship. Coming up on the 1 month sponsorship, so thank you very much. Also, I want to thank George, KJ4KEU from Pactino.com, Dan Romanchik, KB6NU, and Scott Davis, N3FJP, for donating the giveaway prizes back in episode number 50. I've gotten all but one person has contacted me back. I still have Frank Gonzalez, K7PGP, that has yet to make contact with me to claim his prize. So, unfortunately, we're going to have to pass on him, unfortunately. Sorry about that, Frank. So I have selected a new winner for the ebooks written by Dan Romanchik, KB6NU. And the winner of that is going to be Eric Broyles, KJ4KEU. That's Kilo Juliet 4 Kilo Echo Uniform. So, Eric, if you will, please send me an email at K5CLM@everythinghamradio.com with your mailing address to confirm you received this. This is great for you. I looked you up after you were selected, and notice that you're just a technician, so you'll be able to get the ebooks, the no-nonsense guides for the general class and for the extra class as well. And if you're interested, you can also get the CW books and learning CW, so a bunch of great information in there. So Eric, please get in contact with me to claim your prize. The other thing is Ron Bauer in 8IKG was the winner selected for the N3FJP Software Package. He uses another logging program already, so rather than making him take this software package and getting no use out of it, he has requested to get a call sign desk plate. So I'm going ahead and making him one of those. And I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to give away the software package, but actually, you know what? Just kind of out of the blue here. Okay, this is what I'm going to do. Any of you that are on my mailing list right now, So there's a couple of you that actually added on since episode 50 when the deadline was, or episode 51 when the deadline was to get into this. You are now able to do this. So if you were on my mailing address list, all you have to do is send me an email and put logging program in the subject line. And I'll select from those group of people to select the winner, basically. So if you do not have a logging program and you would like one, that's all you got to do. Just send me an email, k5clm@everythinghamradio.com, and in the subject line put logging program, and I'll randomly select one for to win this software package. So that's pretty much it on the announcement so far. Like I said, today we're going to be talking about building antennas. Now, the first question that you have to ask yourself when you're figuring out what kind of antenna you're going to do is what you're going to be using it for, right? And you're going to have to know what frequency you're going to be talking to it on. Is it going to be a VHF antenna, a UHF antenna, an HF antenna? Is it going to be multiband, monoband? Those are the first questions that you need to figure out. And probably the most important as well, especially when you get to the HF antenna side. The VHF, UHF is not that big of a conundrum, I guess you could say. But on the HF side is going to be where it's going to be a little bit more tricky, so to speak. But first off, we're going to be talking about VHF and UHF antennas, since they're the most dynamic, and typically they're the ones that are your starting antennas, right? Those are probably the ones that you're going to be building first. Once you get your license, they're probably going to be the first thing you do. I mean, that was the first thing that I did when I got my license. I got me a Radio Shack HTX 202 handheld. That was my first radio that I got, and it was a brick. But man, was it durable! It was a brick for more than just the size of it. You could drop it from 20 feet in the air. I actually dropped it from my tower one day, about 35 feet up, and it landed. It cracked the battery a little bit, but the radio worked just fine. It was an awesome radio, and if I still had it today, I'd probably still be chugging along. I still see them on like eBay and stuff like that. It's about people wanting to sell them, so they're still there, still around, and they're still chugging along. So, granted, if you get this first radio, and a lot of people will get a handheld because that's what they think. Okay, well, I'm gonna need a handheld radio because I might be doing events, or I might be helping in parades, or I might be helping in a walkathon or whatever. So I can do that. I need a handheld, not a mobile, because I'm not gonna be in my car, right? So that's typically what a first person will get if they could only have enough money for one radio, is a handheld. Now, handhelds are great, but they have very limited range because of the rubber ducks. And the rubber ducks are basically just a glorified dummy load, basically. So you need some extra way to get out. And when I got my license way back when, I started with just the rubber duck. And I'd have like maybe like a 1.5 2 mile radius from the repeater that I could actually talk on and on. And in my car, it made it even worse because I was constantly driving, constantly moving, going under power lines and all that good stuff. So that made it even funner. So I went as far as, I got this little thing that it was kind of like it had like a little suction cup things, and it had a little BNC connector on the top of it, and a short piece of RG58 coax that had a BNC connector on the end of it. So you could take your rubber duck off your handheld, screw it onto this, use the suction cups to put it on the outside of your window, run it through your window and into your radio, and that's what you could use. It was a little bit better. Granted, you didn't have all the stuff on the inside of the car to interfere with it, but it wasn't all that much better, right? So then I took it one step further, and I got me a glass mount antenna. Now, why I did all this, I really don't know. Thinking if I knew then what I know now, I would have wasted my money on this. And in all honesty, it really wasn't all that much, because here in the DFW area was like the base for Radio Shack, right? And Radio Shack was owned by the Tandy Corporation, and Tandy had like a what do you call those things? It wasn't like a distribution center type thing. It was like a seconds store, secondhand store, surplus store. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. That's what I was looking for. So it was a surplus store, and it had all of the extra stuff that Radio Shack stores didn't sell or hadn't sold in a long time. And that's where I got most of this stuff from. So I got me that little rubber duck attachment thing. I got me a glass mount antenna from it. I got a little HT amplifier, which ended up being a pile of something. It didn't work all that well. It was supposed to take my 5 watts in and amplify it up to 40 watts, and I was going to be good. I wasn't going to have to spend the $300 for a mobile radio. But it didn't work. But anyways, back to what I was saying. With the glass mount thing, it worked a little bit better, but it was still just like a quarter wave antenna, so it didn't work all that great. And for my house, I lived, like 7 miles from the repeater. And unfortunately, where the repeater was located at the time was in a hole, but it was on top of a 6-story hospital. So basically where the antenna was like 10 feet above the surrounding terrain. So it didn't have all that great a coverage, right? Or at least in the direction that I lived at, it didn't. And so I needed some way to get out a little bit better, right? And I didn't want to spend a whole lot of money. I didn't want to buy like a $100 vertical or whatever. And at the time, I didn't know anything about J-poles. So what I did, me and my dad, we made a ground plane. Super easy little antenna, and it's like it was just a quarter wave ground plane, really small, really super easy to make, and I think it cost like $2 or $3. The gist of it, the major price of it was the SO239 connector. And that was it. And, if you go onto my show notes of today's episode, you'll see a picture of basically what we built. It's not the one that we built, that was a long time ago and the antenna's long gone, but it's basically the same thing. You can find the show notes of today's episode at everythinghamradio.com/podcast/54. So basically what it is we took this SO239 connector, and it has a little center pin. I'm sure that you've seen it. If not, you can go to the show notes and look at it. But we took some, I believe it was 3/8 copper rod, and cut them into sections. We put one vertically up off the center piece, straight up and down, soldered it on. And we took 4 other pieces, bent them at a 45-degree angle, and put them off as radials onto the side, off of each corner. And then we put it up on like a 20-foot push-up pole, and away I went. And, I was able to do pretty good. I could hit repeaters that were, 40 miles away or so. Of course, it was a really good repeater, but I did it on my handheld, right? So how do we do it? How do you build this antenna? I basically just told you the gist of it. You put the center rod vertically in the center point, and then you put 4 radials out at a 45-degree down angle off of each corner. But how do you figure out how long each section is? Well, that's where this antenna is great, because it just takes a simple little math is all it takes to do. So if you think back to your testing, to your tech study guide or whatever, you may remember the formula that you have to use to figure out the length of, or the size of a wavelength, right? And that formula is 300 divided by frequency, and that gives you the length in meters. So if you take, say you're wanting to do a 2-meter antenna, 2 meters go from 144 to 148 here in the United States. So given that there's not that much difference between 146 and 148, or 144 and 148, if you take right in the middle at 146, you're going to have good coverage either way. Now, if you really want to get stickler on it, if you have a repeater in your local area, you can do this calculation for just that frequency, and you'll have the best SWRs on that frequency, right? But being that it's so small, and you want to be able to use it good everywhere. Take the center frequency, 146 megahertz, and that's going to be your starting frequency. You're going to have your best SWRs right there on the center, and when you get further out to like 144 or 148 is where you're going to have your worst frequency or your worst SWRs, but it's still going to be tolerable, right? So you take the 300, you divide 146, and you get 2.05 meters. Now here in the US, we use the Imperial Measurements, so we have to change meters to feet and then to inches. So in order to do that, you take the 2.05 meters, you multiply it by 3.281, and that comes up with 6.75 feet. Now if you take that, multiply by 12, you get 80.9 inches. Now that's huge, right? And that's the length of each element, the centerpiece, the ground planes, all that. So we don't want to make that big of an antenna, right? Because that would be 80 inches. That's what 7 feet tall or so. You don't really want to do that because you're going to have it already 20 feet in the air. So you can either divide it in half to get a half wave length antenna, which would make it about 40 inches. Now that's still a little long. So let's go a quarter wave. A quarter wave will work fairly well, and that's what I used, and still had good things. So we take that 80.9 inches and we divide it by 4 to make a quarter wave, and that takes the radials down to right around 20.25 inches. For easy math, it's like 20.23 something rather or something like that. So 20.25 inches in length. That's all you need to do. So you have your 20.25. Now that wavelength is what it is in the air, right? In material, it's actually a little bit less. And like in copper and aluminum, stuff like that, your wavelengths actually move a little slower. So if you take about 5% off of it, off of the 20.25 is about what you're going to need. So if you take 20.25, you multiply it by 95%. That brings your length of each element down to about 19.25 inches. And so that's what you use for your centerpiece. Now, I don't remember what we did way back when, and I've looked at several pages while I was doing research for this topic. Some of them said that the radials are supposed to be longer. Some of them said that the radials are supposed to be shorter. I saw a picture of one on the ARRL website that actually said it was supposed to be shorter, that the radials are supposed to be about 18 inches. I saw one on KV6NU's website that he wrote several years ago that actually said that the radials are supposed to be 5% longer. So whatever you do, that it's not going to make that much difference. Between 18 inches and 20.25 inches is not going to be that much difference. You're not going to really notice it on VHF and UHF. Maybe once you get down to like 900 megahertz or something like that, you might see some difference if you do it. But on 2 meters and 440, you're not going to see that much difference. So it's really not that big a deal. So you have your center element, your driven element, which is 20.25, and if you take 95% of that, it makes it down to 19.25. If you decide to go 5% longer for the radials, you're looking at about 20.25. If you go 5% shorter, you're looking at about 18. So whichever way you want to do is fine. If you want to do all of them at 19.25, it's going to work just fine. So take those. I would go a little bit longer. I would cut the pieces at 20.25 because you're going to make your, you're going to have to attach it to the connector somehow. So you can take and, bend it around like where a screw would be or something at the tip. And that would take it back down to about 19.5 or something like that. So cut your pieces, your centerpiece 19.25 inches, your others at 20.25 inches, put loops on the end of them, and bend them down right at where the loop goes. You're going to bend them down to a 45-degree angle. And you're going to place them in each corner. You're going to put a screw in it. You're going to solder it to make sure it has good connection. And basically it's going to look like a church steeple, I guess you could say. Your radials are going to be your roof, your centerpiece is going to be the steeple, and away you go. Stick a coax onto it, put a SWR meter to it, check your SWRs. You know, you'll have to trim it, I'm sure, a little bit. It's not like me to get exactly perfect, but you know, you can trim it and it'll be just fine. So yeah, super easy antenna to make. Super easy. So let's talk about J-poles. Now, J-poles are an antenna that basically look like a J, and that's where their name comes from. It works really well, even though in all reality it really shouldn't, because all a J-pole is basically a short, right? You have the long piece, you have a short piece, and it's shorted together with the coax. So it like defies the laws of physics or something like that, right? But in all reality, a J-pole really works great. I actually have one on my tower that's laying on the ground right now. But I have a dual band one that I bought from Arrow Antennas, which are still around. You can still get them. Unfortunately, their website is down at the time of this recording. But you can buy them at like Ham Radio Outlet. I would say AES, but they're not in business anymore. But you can definitely get them from Ham Radio Outlet. I looked on mtcradio.com, but I didn't see anything listed there for the J-pole that I have. But it's a dual band. It has 2 meters and 440, made from solid aluminum pipe poles or whatever you want to call them. And it's worked great. You take it out, you screw them together, you put your coax on it, and both all 3 antennas that I've bought from Arrow on their J-poles, once you put them together and hook a coax to them, you get perfect SWRs. They're awesome little antennas. But we're talking about homebrew, right? So basically you have 4 measurements that you need to figure out when you're making a J-pole, right? So you need the length of the long segment, you need the length of the short segment, you need the distance between the 2 segments, and the distance from the bottom to where you're going to hook your coax to, right? So those are the 4 things that you need. So how do you figure them out? How do you do it? Okay, so the long segment, and this measurement is going to be from the bottom of the J to the top of the pipe. And I'm talking about, where the little bottom of the hook is, or not the whole length. But from the bottom of the J, you take 705 and you divide it by the frequency, and that gives you the frequency or the length in feet. Okay, the short side you do 234 divided by the frequency, and that gives you length in feet. The distance between the elements are going to be 22 divided by frequency, and the distance from the bottom to the feed point is going to be 23 divided by frequency. Now, you can pause it, you can rewind it and hear those numbers again, or you can go over to the show notes. I have them all written down there, and I actually even have a little picture to show you where I'm talking about for each segment. Now, once you get these calculations, you're going to have to multiply them by 12 to get the length in the inches, so that's a little bit easier, because you're going to get something like 3.4 feet or something like that for the long section. So you're going to want to make sure it's in inches. So you're going to, instead of 3.4 feet, it's going to be 41 inches or something like that. Now, you also want to make sure that you use a good conductor. You want to use copper, like a copper 1/2-inch pipe, or aluminum. Both of those are great things. Copper's super cheap. I think you can buy a piece of 1/2-inch pipe to make this for $5 or something like that. So super cheap, super easy to make. You're going to need a T, a 1/2-inch. If you do it in copper pipe, you're going to need a 1/2-inch T. You're going to need a 1/2-inch 90-degree elbow, and you're going to need 2 caps, possibly 3 caps. So you're going to have your 4 pieces of pipe. You're going to have 2 caps. You're going to have a elbow, and you're going to have a T. Those are the components that you need. Probably $20 altogether is what you're going to spend, if that. Now, if you've seen a J-pole before, you probably know there's a piece sticking out the bottom below the J. Cut that to about 20 inches or so. Stick them all together, solder them up, put a couple holes in there with a couple screws to hook your antenna to. You're going to hook your center conductor to the longer side. You're going to hook the shield to the shorter side. And that's pretty much it. That's basically what it amounts to. Now, you're going to have to adjust it a little bit for SWRs. And in order to do that, I believe you just lower the connection point a little bit, but typically it's going to be pretty close. And like I said, Arrow Antenna has this. You can buy one pre-made for about $60. I think they're like $58 on the Ham Radio Outlet's website. So before we go any further, let's take a break here, and I'm going to tell you about some West Mountain Radio stuff. So have you headed on over to westmountainradio.com to check out what they have there? They have some really awesome stuff, and I really want to thank them for being my sponsor of this podcast. I've used their product for probably about 15 years or so. I've had a rig blaster. I've had a rig runner before. Really awesome stuff. Really durable, super reliable, and great customer service. So several of the things that I've used, of course, I've used the rig blaster, and it's so diverse. It has, you can use it for Echolink, you can use it for RTTY or PSK31, you can use it as a repeater, as an announcement machine for announcements on your regular repeater. The rig runner is great for installing things in your car, in your station. You have one power cable coming from a battery or from a power supply, and individually fused output spots coming from the rig runner. So awesome thing as well. Now, the one thing that I really want to talk to y'all about is the DC to go boxes. These things are awesome. They're really nice hard plastic case that you can put a battery in. And two of the things especially I want to talk to y'all about is the two packages that they have. One of them has a Rig Runner 4008. One of them has a Rig Runner 4007U. Both of them come with a super power gate mounted to the side of it. And this thing is basically a backup power switch, right? You hook up a power supply connection on one slot, you hook your battery to another slot, and then you go out from the power gate to your rig runner, and it will detect if you lose AC power. It'll automatically switch over to your battery. And not only that, it has a charging circuit built into it, so it'll make sure that your battery continues to stay charged. So super awesome, neat thing to do. Super awesome, neat. Yeah, that's good words. Really neat little thing to have. And like I said, the rig runners that are on it, the 4008, it provides you with 40 amps of DC power plug over 8 slots. The 4007U gives you 40 amps across 7 slots, but it also has some extra features like a digital load meter. It has a USB charging point, as well as a solid state push button on-off switch and an automatic shut-off for high and low voltages. Both of these things are mounted to the side of the battery pack, and all you have to do, drop your battery inside of it, hook the power to the power gate, and then to the rig runner, and away you go. You're ready to go. These things are great for things like field day, for winter field day that we just finished this last weekend, for QSO parties, for running your station, your regular everyday station. This would be great. Power goes off, so automatically switches to the battery, and away you go. These two boxes, the one with the 4008 rig runner sells for $249.95. The 4007 used for $269.95. The 4007 I really recommend doing. Step up, even though you have one less spot, you have a lot of other features as well. If you don't like these two, you can even custom make your own DC to go box. Put whatever you want on it, whatever rig runner you want on it. If you want the power grid on it, you can put it on there. If not, no biggie. You can also have a power supply as well, and it'll be mounted on the back of the box. You can buy the battery directly from West Mountain Radio. So great customization, great little functionality, great little boxes. So head on over to West Mountain Radio and check them out. Just go to everythinghamradio.com/WMR to check them out. And also you get a free USB power monitor with any purchase. Super easy, right? So make sure you head on over to West Mountain Radio, check them out, buy something, and thank them for sponsoring this podcast. Okay, so we've talked about a ground plane, and we've talked about a J-pole. Those are the two easiest things to make. We're going to talk a little bit harder now. And this is the last thing we're going to be talking about for VHF. And this actually goes for VHF, UHF, and HF as well. And that is directional antennas. And by directional antennas, I'm talking specifically about the Yagi antennas. I'm not talking about the dish, the parabolic dish, anything like that. I'm talking about the beams. Now, these things are great to have, especially if you live out in the fringes. You can aim them to wherever your repeater is or wherever the station that you're talking simplex to is, and you'll get a better punch to them, better reception from them than a omnidirectional antenna. However, they are harder to build, and the reason is because the mathematics are a whole lot more involved. The making them is a whole lot more involved. And we're going to talk about a little bit here in just a second. If you are going to build one, I highly recommend you search for either some already built plans or a calculator or something to help you figure out the length of each one, the distance between each one. The math can be a little tricky and it's not exact. So you will have to play with it a little bit. Yagis are a beast in among themselves, right? So I did find a set of plans that looked really good, and each of them it's well made, and it shows two different ways of attaching the tuning, or what they call the gamma match element, to the antenna. There is a link in the show notes to it. But if you want to do it all yourself, I did find an article written by NT1K on his blog that explains it pretty well. The only drawback to his article is that the program that he talks about is no longer available, so you can't really, quote, fine-tune your design like he says to in the article. But he did give some dimensions on rough calculations, and you can find those in the show notes as well. But I'm going to show you a little bit, or tell you. I can't really show you because you're listening to me. You're not looking at me, right? Basically, how to figure out what you're going to be talking about. Okay, you're going to use the same frequency as you do, or the same formula as we did with the J-pole and the ground plane. You're going to use the 300 divided by the frequency, and that's going to give you the wavelength. So if you're doing a 2 meter Yagi, you're going to do the 146. So you take 300, you divide it by 146, and you get 2.05. That's your wavelength, and you're going to use this as the reference for all of your mathematics later on. Okay, so as you probably know, Yagi antenna consists of 4 basic elements. You have your reflector, your driven element, your director, and your boom. Now, your boom is going to be just as long as however many directors that you have. So that's not really taken into account in the measurements. But the reflector, the driven element, and the director are. And your reflector is going to be your longest. And you're going to take that, you're going to multiply 0.493 multiplied by your wavelength. So you go 0.493 times 2.05. And it's going to come up with about 1.1 or so meters long. The driven element, you're going to use 0.73 multiplied by the wavelength. And that's going to come out to about 0.97 meters, or about 38 inches. And then the directors, you're going to go from 0.44 times the wavelength, and then you're going to drop 5 1,000ths for every director that you do after that. So 0.44, 0.435, 0.43, all those multiplied by wavelength. And that'll give you the length of each director. Now, basically, you're with each director, you're going to drop basically about 1/8 of an inch or so for easy math. Now, the spacing is also important, so you also have to do the math on it, right? So the distance between the reflector and the driven element, you use 0.125 multiplied by the wavelength. The reflector to the first director, you're going to do 0.25 by wavelength. The second director, 0.5. The third director, 0.75. And it basically just goes up 0.25 for every director that you have. So there you go. That's the math. If you totally missed what I just said, because I did kind of go through it kind of fast, you can back it up and listen to it again and write it down, or you can go to the show notes and it's all written out there. The math is already done for you, as well as converting it to inches for those y'all here in the U.S. So that basically talks about all we're going to talk about with the VHF. We're going to talk about a little bit about the HF antennas, and like I said, for HF, for the Aggies rather, same concept on your HF beams. The only difference is you're going to use some thicker elements. You know, for your VHF, you're going to use probably about 1/4 inch, maybe 3/8 of an inch aluminum rod or something like that. For your HF, you're probably going to use like 3/4 inch or 1 inch, because it has to be able to hold up the element, because it's going to be a whole lot longer, right? You know, 2 meter frequency compared to a 20 meter frequency is going to be a whole lot bigger. So you have to have a bigger, thicker tube. Okay, so probably the easiest HF antenna to build is a dipole. And it's probably the easiest to build, the most commonly used on HF. And you can do it in several different configurations. You can do it just as a straight dipole, an inverted V, a sloper, etc. Now, if you've seen the Pac-10 minis, those are basically just dipoles, is all those are. And basically all a dipole is just a straight piece of wire with a connector at the end of it, more or less. You know, there's still a couple little things, but that's basically what it is. Now, if you plan your antenna right, you can do it without needing a tuner and you want to do that because you want to maximize your power output. Because the better you match your antenna, the lower your SWRs are, the more power you're going to be putting out to the antenna, and the farther you're probably going to talk. Now, just like with the VHF and UHF antennas, you could do the calculations for the center of the band, but if you're going to be talking on a certain frequency, more often than not, you might want to do it to just that frequency. Now, it's up to you. Now, with say 20 meters or something like that, if you tune it to the center of the band and you're going to be using the entire band, you're probably going to need an antenna tuner for the outer portions of the band, because the tuning is probably only going to go like maybe 2 megahertz or so, plus or minus where you tuned it to have a decent SWR. So you're probably going to need a tuner for the entire band, whereas you don't really you don't at all with VHF and UHF. So, okay, so how do you figure out what length you need your dipole on? Now, this one is going to be a whole lot more intense, more challenging than just a ground plane antenna or J-pole antenna, because there's a lot more math that's involved, and it's going to be a lot bigger. So, like I said, you want to make sure that you figure out where you're going to be talking the most, or what you're going to be tuning your dipole to. So, the formula for half-wave dipoles, as we all should have learned here in the US, is based on a constant number of 468, which is divided by the center frequency we wish to use for our dipole, giving us the total length in feet for the dipole. So you take 468 divided by the frequency, you get your total feet length. Now, this whole standby dipole formula has been around since way before time started, and has been arrived at by much experimentation by thousands of hams. But it's not perfect, right? It's going to take some time. It's going to take some adjustments, and it's not always exactly correct. So let's say that you're going to be doing a 20 meter dipole. Okay. So first off, to start, you plug in your constant 468. You divide it by the frequency that you're going to be using. And let's say you're going to be doing it as 14.3 megahertz. You're going to center your dipole around that frequency. So you take 468, you divide it by 14.3, and we get 32.72 feet, or about 32 feet 8 inches or so in total length. Okay, so now that we know it's going to be about 32 feet 8 inches or so, we want to give ourselves a little bit of leeway, right? We want to give ourselves a little bit of extra stuff for tuning purposes. So let's make it about 34 feet or so, and that's really just a guess. So you need to write that number down first, okay? And okay, so now that we've done that, we take our wire and we cut it to that length. We cut it to about 34 feet. Now, we put all the feed line, the insulators, the support, all that. We raise the antenna up and we test it out. And unfortunately, rather than the SWR being lowest at 14.3, it's going to be about 14.05. You know, not exactly what we were talking about. So, how do you figure out exactly how long it's going to be? Now, you have the record, or you have that 34 feet wrote down, right? Now, you got to take that number, and we're going to multiply it by the frequency where your SWR was the lowest. So that one's going to be, in this example, 14.050. That's going to give us our new constant for our formula. So if you take 34 and multiply by 14.050, you get 477.7. So now we take that constant, we plug it into our formula, and we take 477.7, you divide it by 14.3, and that comes to 33.4 feet, or 33 feet, 4 inches, 5 inches, something like that. So we make our antenna to that length. Now, rather than cutting it off, you can just kind of wind it back on itself, and it'll create a short down the end. It'll make the thing shorter, and that way you don't cut it off and you don't lose anything from it. So you can do it that way. So now we take this, we made our antenna to 33 feet, 5 inches or so. We put it all back up, we raise it up, and what do we get? Is it going to be exactly where we're talking about? Is it going to be the 14.3 megahertz where it's the lowest? It could be. It could still be a little bit off, and if it is, then just take and do the formula again. Take your, if you find out that the lowest SWR is at 14.25 now, and you're not you want it to be exact, you're OCD about it or something like that, and you want it 14.3, you take it back down, you take your new length, your 33.4 feet that you made it, you multiply it by your 14.25, and that gets your new constant. Then you take that new constant, you divide it by 14.3 again, and that'll give you a new length. And you can do that. You can test it. You can play with it a little bit or whatever, and away you go. If you want to do the math way, that's the way to do it. That's the easiest way to do it that I've found. If you want to just play with it, you can just play with it as well. But anyways, there you go. That is how you make your dipole. See what I mean? It's a lot of math, and it's is it worth it? Yes, it could be. Especially if you don't have a good tuner, or you don't want to put a tuner on there, you want to put maximum power out, and stuff like that. It's always best to match your antenna to your radio. Now, being with HF is a whole lot more forgiving than VHF and UHF is, being that you can use pretty much anything for an antenna, right? With HF you can use pretty much anything. You can use a street pole, you can use a fence, you can use a gutter, you can use a handrail. All these things you can hook up to your radio, and with a good tuner and low power, you can use it. You may not get the greatest results, but you can use them still. HF is very forgiving when it comes to that. VHF, UHF, not so much. But HF is very forgiving when it comes to that. You may have to use your radios on low power at QRP levels, something like that, and you may not get out the best, but you can still get out. So, dipoles for your HF radios, J-poles and ground plane for your VHF, UHF. Those are the two easiest things to build when it comes to antennas. Now, I hope I didn't lose any of y'all. I hope I didn't talk too fast. There's a lot of information when it comes to building antennas. There's several books you can buy from the ARRL on building antennas, and I will include a link to all those in the show notes, and they will be affiliate links, so if you click on them and you buy them, I will get a small commission for your purchase. You will notice there is no difference in the price for you. I just get like what they call a finder's fee or marketing fee. So if that interests you, please go over there and check it out. Buy the book. Great information on it. I have one of them around here that I've used before on building antennas, and it's a great little thing. Also, you can go to Ham Universe. Check out their website, super easy, hamuniverse.com /antennas.html. There is a link in the show notes as well for that, but they have a whole list of VHF, UHF, HF antennas, plans on how to build them, step-by-step instructions, and all that good stuff. Sorry for the audio going in and out there. I get leaned too far forward. I'm like, okay, I don't hear myself as much anymore. But anyways, that's about antennas, and that pretty much wraps it up. I hope you liked it. If you do, please leave a comment below. If you've built an antenna, I would love to hear about your challenges that you had. What was the hardest part about it? I'm sure if you like this hobby as much as I do, I'm sure you had fun building it, even though it might have been a little bit frustrating. So please leave a comment in the show notes of today's episode, telling me about your antenna builds. What kind of antenna you built, what was some of the problems that you had, stuff like that. Stuff that might help somebody else that's listening to this podcast get their first antenna build under their belt, so to speak. So I guess that pretty much wraps it up. We have quite a few events and stuff coming up over the next 2 weeks. Not so many hamfests as we did last week, but let's go ahead and move on to that. Alrighty, so for the events for the next 2 weeks, all of the times that I'm going to be giving are in Zulu time unless I specify otherwise. And all this information was taken from the Wa7 Bnm Contest Calendar. So first off, we have the YLOM Contest. That's the Young Ladies Relay League, Young Lady Old Man Contest. And that goes from February 3rd at 1400 hours to February 5th at 200 hours. We have the Triathlon DX contest, which is on February 4th. And from 0 to 759 is going to be on CW. From 800 to 1559 it's on single sideband. And from 1600 to 2359 on RTTY. We have the Vermont QSO party on February 4th from 0 hours to February 5th at 2400 hours. We have the 1010 International Winter Contest on single sideband February 4th from 001 to the 5th at 2359. We have the F9AA Cup on CW from 1200 hours on the 4th to 1200 hours on the 5th. We have the Black Sea Cup International on February the 4th from 1200 hours to the 5th at 11:59. We have the Minnesota QSO Party on the 4th from 1400 hours to 2400 hours. We have the FYBO Winter QRP Sprint on February 4th from 1400 hours to 2400 hours as well. And also we have the British Columbia QSO Party on February 4th from 1600 hours to February 5th at 400 hours. There's quite a few QSO parties on that weekend, so if you want to get your QSO party groove going, get and that's a pretty good weekend for it this weekend coming up. The AGCW Straight Key Party is going to be on the 4th as well, from 1600 to 1900. The FISTS, FISTS Winter Slow Speed Sprint is on the 4th from 1700 to 2100 hours. The Mexico RTTY International Contest is on February 4th from 1800 hours to February 5th at 1759. On the 5th, we have the North American Sprint for CW from 0 hours to 400 hours. On the 6th, we have the RSGB 80 meter club champion on single sideband from 2000 hours to 2130. On the 7th, we have the ARS Spartan Sprint from 200 hours to 400 hours. On February the 11th, we have the CQ WWRTTY WPX contest, that's a mouthful, and that runs from 0 hours on the 11th to 2359 on the 12th. We have the SARL Field Day contest going from February the 11th at 1000 hours to February 12th at 1000 hours. We have the Asia Pacific Spring, February the 1100 hours to 1300 hours. The Dutch PACC contest from 1200 hours on the 11th to 1200 hours on the 12th. Next is the KCJ Top Band contest on February the 11th. From 1200 hours to the 12th at 1200 hours. We have the SKCC Weekend Sprintathon on February the 11th from 1200 hours to February 12th at 2400 hours. Next up, we have the Ole Miss QSO Party from 1500 hours on the 11th to 1500 hours on the 12th. The New Hampshire QSO Party on the 11th from 1600 to the 12th at 2200 hours. Next, we have the FIST Winter Unlimited Sprint on the 11th from 1700 hours to 2100 hours. We have the AWA Amplitude Modulation QSO Party on February the 11th from 2300 hours to the 12th of 2300 hours. We have the Balkan HF Contest on the 12th from 1200 to 1800 hours. And we have the CQC Winter QSO Party on the 13th from 100 to 259. And next up we have the ARRL School Club Roundup on February the 13th from 1300 hours to February the 17th at 2359. We have the PODXS 070 Club Valentine's Sprint on Valentine's Day, 0 hours to 2359. Guys out there, don't forget that is actually Valentine's Day, so don't forget to get some flowers or candy or something like that for your wife, right? Or your girlfriend. Stay out of the doghouse. Unless your ham shack is your doghouse, then you might want to forget. Okay, so anyways. Alright, we have the AGCW Semi-Automatic Key Evening on the 15th from 1900 hours to 2030 hours. And last but not least, we have the RSGB 80 meter club championship for data on the 15th from 2000 hours to 2130. Again, all the information for these contests were taken from the Wa7 Bnm Contest Calendar. You can find a link to that contest calendar on the show notes of today's episode. Okay, so let's talk about some hamfests. First off, on the 3rd, we have the Southern Florida Section Convention, the Tropical Hamburgers 50th anniversary in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. On the 4th, we have the Desert Rats Hamfest in Palm Springs, California. We have the Hiawatha Amateur Radio Association Swap and Shop in Nagehe, Michigan. We have the Mine Creek Winterfest in Lasigan, Kansas. We have the South Carolina State Convention Charleston Hamfest in North Charleston, South Carolina. I'm sure Kale over at Hamradio 360 will probably be going to that. Right up his alley. Right around, yeah. We have the Virginia State Convention Frost Fest in Richmond, Virginia. On the 10th, we have the Southeastern Division Convention in Orlando Hamcation in Orlando, Florida. And on the 11th, we have the Swap and Shop in Traverse City, Michigan. All the information was taken from the ARRL Hamfest calendar, which you can find a link to in the show notes of today's episode. Alright, in the news segment of today's episode, we are going to be talking about 3 articles or 3 different subjects that I found this week. One of which came from what can happen in the amateur radio community because of the service that we provide. The second story that we're going to be talking about is basically a congratulatory story, and the last is a neat little tech story that I found on somebody's blog just kind of out of the blue. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is from the ARRL news feed, and it was posted on January 27th, 2017. And it's titled, NPOTA Participation Leads to Inaugural Communications Detail for National Park Services. This story is about Jeff Don, KB3ZKU of Rockville, Maryland, activated almost every NPOTA unit in the Washington, D.C. area during the year-long National Parks on the Air program. That and his prior D.C. area law enforcement experience gave him a leg up to snag a gig during the presidential inauguration and the Women's March on Washington as a radio operator for the National Park Service. Don, an ARRL member, spent 32 hours over the course of 3 days as a volunteer operating Park Service radios from NPS headquarters. Quote, I was invited to serve as a communications officer during the inauguration at the NPS Incident Command Post at their headquarters facility as a direct result from participating in NPOTA, he told the ARRL. NPS Eastern Incident Management Team Communications Officer Gary Shipley, N5GQD, said Don was a quick study. He handled announcements, dispatching, trouble calls, and the request for assistance on 4 radio nets with ease. He also handled equipment issues. He provided a timely and valuable assistance in his participation and was key to the success of the mission. In appreciation, the NPS gave Don a certificate, a reflective service vest, scarf, and hat, plus he got to meet the acting NPS director, Michael Reynolds. Don said the climate-controlled, access-restricted environment was a far cry from his first presidential inauguration experience. On January 20th, 1993, while serving as a law enforcement officer, I remember standing at parade rest for what seemed like hours on the parade route between the crowd and the street, facing the crowd, not the procession, while hungry and freezing, he recounted. On his second day, Saturday, January 21st, Don was up very, very early and involved in coordinating planning with the local point folks involved with the Women's March on Washington. Just elected president of the HAC DC Area Amateur Radio Club, Don was able to give the okay for his club's W3HAC facility to serve as net control station site for amateur radio operations, helping those arriving for the march. That facilitated another connection between the NPS Dispatch Center HQS Incident Command Post and the Volunteer Amateur Radio Net Control Station, who were both communicating and working with their stations in the field as the, quote, boots on the ground on both sides of the equation. Art Feller, W4ART, was the primary NCS of the W3HAC. We did what hams do best, communicate messages clearly and accurately between WMW leaders and key staff members, Feller told ARRL. They worked with their marshals and health professionals to assist everyone as they were so well trained. Feller said that during the march, cell phone service failed under the demand of the population equal to or slightly larger than the entire population of the District of Columbia, all within the confines of the National Mall. The outage even slowed text messages to a crawl. Dan observed the radio amateurs were, at several times, the only working communications link between organizers, marshals, volunteers, and marchers. Don said it was an honor and a privilege to serve as a volunteer. It was amazing to have been given the chance to participate and to have been so closely involved with such an amazing event, he told the ARRL. Don's participation in the formal NPS communications event has helped to strengthen further the ties between the NPS and the amateur radio community. ARRL Media and Public Relations Manager Sean Kutzko, KX9X, said, after hams made over 20,000 visits to 460 NPS units for the ARRL's National Parks in the Air program in 2016, during the NPS Centennial, helping to raise the visibility of NPS administration units, especially smaller units, worldwide. You know, this story is really neat to me. I mean, this is a prime example of what we can do as amateur radio operators in, I don't know, getting noticed, I guess, maybe. You know, you go out and you find these, you volunteer for different things, and you do what we do best as amateur radio operators. You know, we communicate. But not only do we communicate, but we communicate professionally. We work together with other people and make their jobs easier. And that really is what gets us noticed. That's what gets the, I really don't want to say recognition that we deserve, because we're not doing it for being recognized, right? We're doing this to help others. And that's exactly what the amateur radio community is all about. So kudos to you, Dan. Kudos to you, Jeff, for your service in the National Park System, and awesome job on all of your activations during the National Parks in the Air event last year. Okay, so next up, this story is of an amazing milestone when it comes to the amateur radio operators. You know, most people don't or struggle to make it to the age of 80. Well, now there is a ham, and his name is Paul Elliott, W5DM, of Hobbs, New Mexico. He has been a ham for 80 years. Can you imagine that? I mean, you know, I have a hard time imagining making it to 80 years of age, much less being a ham for 80 years. Of course, I would have to be 95 to make that. But anyways, this story, it's basically congratulating him on his milestone. And not only that, but it says, he recently posted his milestone on the top band reflector. Growing up during the Great Depression in Kingsville, Texas, Elliott got his ham ticket at the age of 14 as a W5GGV. Now he's 94. Elliott eventually worked his way up to the top rung, amateur extra. Back in the day when the license offered no additional privileges, just the prestige. It did later allow him to apply for a 2-letter suffix call sign, and he became W5DM. His first radio was a home-brewed from Atwater, Kent radio parts with a wire to a tree for an antenna. But he remembers making his own Galena crystal for a crystal set and experimenting with a Model T spark coil. He continued building his own transmitters and receivers for a couple of decades, operating CW until single sideband came along. Elliott succeeded in working all states on 160 meters from 120 foot by 120 foot electronically noisy city lot with a long but low semi-inverted L, as he described it. Now he has 189 DXCC entries confirmed on top band. That's a lot of context, a lot of different countries and stuff. That's just amazing. A Texas native and a World War II veteran, Elliott graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy and served in the Pacific. After the war, he was a Navy aviator. In the late 1940s, he began farming cotton and maize, which he continued until 1980 on 200 South Texas acres, then taking on a second job as a chemical plant engineer before going back to school to earn a doctorate in physics from Texas A&M. I am basically a peasant with a lot of education, is how he described himself. He spent more than 20 years in academia as a professor of physics at his alma mater. In addition to amateur radio, Elliott enjoys flying and is a licensed commercial pilot. Basically, I am doing today is chasing and the occasional DX, Elliott told the ARRL. He said that he has a transceiver and a couple of wire antennas that he makes work on all bands. Elliott has 325 DXCC entries confirmed on all bands, plus a lot of memories from an earlier era of amateur radio. He recalled a few hams in Texas who directly coupled the final tube of his transmitter with 1500 volts DC on a plate to his antenna. When he received a pink slip advisory notice from the FCC monitoring station in Hawaii for harmonics, his friends saw the bright side and bragged about the distance his signal had traveled. Age, not surprisingly, has taken its toll. Elliott said the top band reflector, noting that his CW speed was now down to about 20 to 25 words per minute because of waning dexterity. Thank you to all. I cannot read here, y'all. Thank to all who have had the knowledge and the kindness to help me over the years, he said. You know, this gentleman has had an awesome life just from this little bitty short, like 300 word news story. Been a ham for 80 years, is an amateur extra, went to the Naval Academy, served in the war. Thank you very much for your service, Paul. Is a pilot, was a farmer, and then went back to school and got his doctorate degree in physics, and then spent time as a professor. That's just amazing. Here I sit at the age of 37 years old, and I have nowhere near the accomplishments that this gentleman has. So, congratulations to Paula Elliott, W5DM of Hobbs, New Mexico. You are a scholar and a awesome gentleman, and I hope maybe one day that I'll be able to talk to you on the air. Okay, so the last thing that I'm going to talk about in the news segment, for those of you that don't know it, you can go on Google, and if you go to alerts.google.com, you can sign up to get an email either every time something pops up or once a day or not at all. And you can set up like a search term or something like that, and it'll send you an email of either all the top stories or all of the hits for the day that Google has found. And I've done this since I started this blog, and I have two of them actually set up. I have one set up for amateur radio and one set up for ham radio. Now there's a lot of overlapping stories and stuff. But I find a lot of neat stories on this email that I get daily, and one of them really kind of caught my eye. It's one of those things that are like, it's amazing what technology can do. We've come so far in the past, 20, 30 years or so, in the age of technology that, the sky's the limit. But this article, and if you go to the show notes, there's a link to the full article. But anyways, it is on the AG1LE blog. And on it, I haven't looked at a whole bunch of other stories on that he has, but I've looked at a couple of them, and he's got some really neat ideas. And one of them is what really caught my eye this time. And I'm sure that a lot of y'all have heard of the Amazon Echo, right? It's the commercials that you see where you see like, "Hey Alexa," and you ask it a question, and it goes out and finds the answer. Well, he's taken this and applied it to amateur radio. Right now, it's just kind of a proof of concept type project that he's doing. But basically what it amounts to is he's made a way to interface his Amazon Echo to remotely control his Elecraft KX3. Yeah, you heard me right. He's remotely controlling it by voice. That's just awesome to me. And not only is he doing that, but he's also talking about things like, stuff that you can do with the Amazon Echo when it comes to amateur radio. Things like listening to podcasts, like listening to this one. You can say, "Hey Alexa, play the Everything Ham Radio podcast," and it'll do it. Getting the most recent DX cluster information. He has a thing set up, a little server set up where it grabs all the DX cluster information. And not only that, but it will tune his Elecraft to a certain frequency. It will get the DX cluster information and it'll read it to him. Also, he talks about things like getting APRS information. Having it where he can say, "Hey Alexa, where is K5CLM?" And it'll, read back the coordinates maybe, or the closest address or something. I don't know exactly all the specifics, but this, it, like I said, it amazes me the things that people do with a little bit of technology. And it's a really neat concept, and it's basically really in just the alpha phase. So he says it's still pretty fragile, but once he gets it more stable, he's willing to put it on GitHub if there's any interest. So if you want to read more about this article that he wrote and the project that he's doing, make sure you go to the show notes of today's episode and scroll all the way down to the bottom and check out the link to his article. I included it in the section, and you'll see it, Amazon Echo Alexa Skills for Amateur Radios, what the section is titled. So head on over there, leave a comment for him. If you find this interesting as well, leave a comment and definitely check it out because it really interests me. Alright guys, well that pretty much wraps up this episode. I want to give a quick shout out again to the new winner of all or any of the ebooks written by Dan Romanchek, KB6NU, which you can find at kb6nu.com. He has the no-nonsense study guides for the technician, the general, and the extra class. He has a Learning CW book and several other books that you can get both in print and in ebook format. So, unfortunately, I didn't hear from the winner that was announced back in episode 51. So this episode, I have announced a new winner, and that is Eric Broyles, KJ4KEU. So Eric, please shoot me an email, k5clm@everythinghamradio.com, with your mailing address to confirm your receipt of this prize, I guess. Yeah, prize. Also, again, Ron Bauer has decided to take a call sign desk plate. So the N3FJP software package is up for grabs. And, I did a lot of thinking on this, and I decided that I'm going to do another different style of giveaway thing, because I don't want to do it like we did, because two of them, Ron Bauer didn't want it, and Larry Nutt, I offered it to him as in exchange for the desk plate, he didn't want it because both of them use a logging program already. So what I've decided to do is, if you are on my mailing list right now, send me an email, k5clm@everythinghamradio.com, and in the subject line put logging program. And this is if you don't have a logging program already that you're using, or you don't like the one that you have, shoot that over to me with the subject of logging program, and I will draw the winner next episode. Again, you have to be on the mailing list to do it. So there's been a couple of people that have joined the mailing list since episode 51. Thank y'all for joining. Y'all are included as well. So make sure you send that email to me. The other thing, remind everybody, if you do not receive emails if you're not on my email list and you want to be, it's super easy to do. Several ways you can do it. If you go to the show notes of today's episode, there's a link at the bottom to sign up for the email list. You can also go to everythinghamradio.com/subscribe and join the mailing list. I don't send a whole lot of emails, just basically when I publish a new post or a new podcast episode. Every now and then I'll send a couple extra emails, but I'm not going to spam your email box. So please subscribe to my email list. Also, please like me on Facebook. You can find me at facebook.com/everythinghamradio, or you can join the group, you can join the group at facebook.com/groups/everythinghamradio. Also, please, you can follow me on YouTube at youtube.com/everythinghamradio. I am on Twitter at K5CLM. It's probably where I'm most active at. So follow me on there. So that pretty much wraps it up. The one thing that I really want to, it blows my mind, and I just looked at it not too long ago, and last month, the beginning of last month, I told y'all that December was my record month, right? And I had something like 6,000, a little bit over 6,000 downloads. Well, somebody mentioned to me in the survey that I had going on that he could only see the last 10 episodes of my podcast. I didn't realize that until he said it. And I went back and fixed it. And the response that I've had from all of y'all listeners, whether you're just coming on or whether you've been here for a while or you missed some of the episodes and you've gone back and listened to it, it's just outstanding. This last month, January 2017, is my record month again. 2 months in a row we broke a record. But this one I'm afraid it's going to be just a little bit before I break it again. I've basically doubled the amount of downloads that I had from December. I've had just shy of 13,000 downloads of all of my podcast episodes. And last episode on stealth antennas is coming up on my number 1 episode total. It had 1,900 and some odd downloads in the first week. Actually, not even the first week, because here it is. I'm recording this on Tuesday, so it's had 5 days and it's almost had 2,000 downloads. So thank y'all very much for listening to my podcast. Hopefully y'all enjoy it. And so I guess that's about it. Again, I want to thank West Mountain Radio for being a sponsor for this podcast. If you haven't done so already, head on over to everythinghamradio.com/WMR for details on how to get a USB amperage meter free with the purchase of anything on their website. So head on over there, check them out, buy something, and get your free meter. I guess that pretty much wraps it up. Thank y'all everybody for listening, and I guess until next time, this is K5CLM signing out. 73 y'all.